Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. Last Thursday, the Supreme Court rejected the Trump administration's attempt to dismantle the program protecting undocumented immigrants brought to the United States as children. A reprieve for nearly almost 700,000 recipients known as Dreamers. The 5-4 decision written by Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. stunned President Trump, who said in a tweet that it was a shotgun blast to the face of people who are proud to call themselves Republicans or conservatives. Chief Justice Roberts said the administration had not provided proper legal justification for ending DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program implemented by then President Barack Obama 8 years ago. So this program qualifies enrollees to work, study, and remain in the United States on a renewable permit. So joining us today to discuss the decision of the Supreme Court and what life is like for Dreamers are two very special guests. We have today with us immigration attorney Hassan Ahmad. Hassan holds a law degree from Tulane Law School in New Orleans, Louisiana, and is the founder and principal of HMA law firm. Hassan is fluent and proficient in 8 languages beside English. He's known and respected amongst his peers for his reliable knowledge of law, research, writing ability, and trial skills. He's the go-to attorney in the matters for immigration law. And also joining us today will be Luis Angel Aguilar. Luis is the Virginia director of CASA in Action, the Mid-Atlantic region's largest electoral organization fighting for immigration rights. Thank you so much for being here, both of you. I'm honored and it's a pleasure having both of you on board. Welcome.
Thank you for having us, Hina.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Well, this is certainly a time where, and a lot of our community, the Muslim community, a lot of times these, we have a lot of discussions about immigration, but many aspects of this are sort of lost. So I wanted to start with you, Luis. I know you've probably told it 1,000 times, but can you start with your own story?
Yeah, I can start with my own story. Separating from the organization that I work with, I came with my family from Mexico, actually, when I was 10 years old. Crossed the border, and just like many young folks who benefit from the DACA program, before I was actually documented, as we call it, those who benefit from this program, I was undocumented. So I'm formally undocumented, and so having grown up here in Virginia and in Arizona without documentation, as many immigrants face here in the United States, it's a very difficult situation in which society excludes you. It does not include you in both society, not only just in anything civic like voting or making sure that your voice is heard, but more specifically on the day to day, really hard and really difficult in being able to obtain a legal way to work. That is really difficult. So you are denied a ton of jobs and opportunities. You miss so many opportunities, not because you want to, but because you don't have that legal route to apply for a job. And even if you apply, it's very difficult to obtain. Another thing is accessing a driver's license. And so the United States always claims that it's the country of liberty, but you don't really have a liberty of movement if you are not able to access a driver's license here. And it is called a privilege, but it's really difficult for anyone to mobilize or move in certain areas of the country if you do not have a vehicle. So that and have that ability to drive legally. That is one component. And then third of all, just on your day to day, opening a bank account, enrolling your kids in school, all of this requires for most folks, they take this for granted, but it requires a lot of work if you are undocumented. Some people figure it out, some people do not figure it out. And what ends up happening is that we create a shadow community. I say a shadow because it's not part of the general society and community. But again, it's done and created out of necessity. And I mean, immigrants will get the job done. We'll figure it out way how to do it. But again, it makes things so much more complicated than they need to be. And at the end of the day, I'll finish with this. We end up missing a ton of potential. I mean, we're incredibly proud of Brother Hassan that he's a lawyer. We're missing so many lawyers, so many doctors, so many teachers, so many first responders. Because why? Because they are undocumented, and that's one route. And those of who benefit from DACA, we're also missing that potential because they are every 2 years they are worried. One, about renewal, but not only that, under this administration specifically, they are worried about even the program itself, whether it will live on or not.
So this is something that, well, this is a story we sort of like to tell, but that when a lot of people think it all started with Donald Trump. But one, Hassan, I'd like you to perhaps share what the story was like under President Obama. And then Luis, if you could, you grew up in the shadow of deportation threats. So, if, Hassan and then Luis.
Sure. Thank you once again for having me. And I'm honored to know Luis and have worked with him on several advocacy issues over the past few years. Look, I've got the easy job. I've got the easy job. I was born in the United States to Pakistani immigrants. Their immigration story is very, very close to my heart, as are the stories of immigrants like Luis. But I've got the easy job. I was born here. I have a law degree. I can use it. I don't see it as I see it as a duty for the privilege that I was given to be able to turn around and try to use that to help the communities that need it. And I've tried, to do that, but it has been difficult. It has been difficult at times. 8 years ago, when DACA was first announced, I started practicing. Let me back up a little bit. I started practicing law in the shadows of 9/11. The first cases that I got were from the Muslim registry cases, the NSEERS program, the National Security Entry Exit Registration System, Patriot Act, and a number of other policies that were put forth by the newly formed Department of Homeland Security and its component organizations, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, Customs and Border Protection, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. Things were different, starting in 2003, 2004, and moving on. When Obama was elected, there was a collective sigh of relief that perhaps we would finally start to see pave the road towards actual comprehensive immigration reform, which is ultimately what we actually need. Our immigration system, I work in it, I use it as much as I can, but it is an antiquated dinosaur. It belongs in a different era. It needs absolutely to be reformed. The fact that a person like Luis, who has so much to offer this country, is deadlocked into this position of having to apply for a work permit renewal every 2 years, that says it all. That really says it all. That tells you exactly how dysfunctional our immigration system is. What we lack is the political will to actually get it done. It's happened. We've gotten close in 2007. It happened again, got close in 2013. And each time, the anti-immigrant movement has operated collectively and individually to stall all meaningful efforts at getting that reform and keeping people like Luis and hundreds of thousands and tens of millions of people in limbo and locked out from the potential that they otherwise could have. Look, Obama's record, I am not an apologist. I am not the kind of person that puts people up on pedestals. I don't want to whitewash anything. I don't want to overstate or understate. Obama's record on immigration was mixed. He was known and deserved the moniker of being the deporter in chief.
Mm.
More people were deported under Obama's watch than any other president. We had child detentions. We had family detentions during Obama's administration. There were separations, although not by policy. But at the same time, there were a lot of positive developments. And DACA was probably one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest one. The other one that I can think of are stateside waivers, 601As that were put in 2013 that helped a lot of people as well. There were some favorable decisions, that have come out that have given us as lawyers the tools that we need to actually be able to fight and advocate through the immigration system and through the federal court system to be able to actually get permanent relief for people. But DACA was huge. There's no denying it. The fact that it was that it helped so many 650,000 or 700,000 people be able to recognize that, hey, there's a life here too, and there is a way for us to be able to contribute. There is a way for us to be able to meet our full potential. There was an enormous amount of excitement. And people, calling and gathering. Luis probably remembers the early days of DACA in June of 2015. People getting their documents together, showing proof that they met all of the requirements, and when the approval started coming in, just seeing what people were able to achieve, in a few short years. And this is just one tiny, corner of the undocumented population, and you give them just a little bit of empowerment by giving them a work permit and the ability to get a driver's license, and look what they've been able to accomplish. Imagine what would happen if we actually, gave people a path towards citizenship, and not just the portion of the undocumented community that qualify as dreamers, but everybody. Imagine the kind of country that we could have.
And that I've heard that from a lot of dreamers who, feel that guilt where it's not just about us, it's about our parents, if everybody else who's made the, sacrifices for them to be here. So if you'd like to answer that, Luis, about just living under that threat of deportation, what does that feel like in real life?
Well, I think I'm in a very privileged position, actually, Hannah, because I know that brother Hassan said that he's privileged, but I am privileged as well in the fact that even though I did grow up undocumented and I had several jobs before even working in the organization that I do, I actually joined this organization because I came to the organization to apply for DACA. And so I was one of the folks that was waiting in a huge line, to be able to get help to fill out my DACA application. But going back to the original question on the threat of deportation, I see it with not only friends and family. They are constantly worried. I say that I'm privileged because the fact that with the organization and with the work that we have been doing, I realize that situations and policies and society as a whole can change. And so because I'm in a position of being in a constant voice and figure in trying to change situations and policy, even at the local and state level, I don't have that constant fear for myself, because I understand that it goes beyond me. It goes beyond me. It affects my whole community. There are folks, again, with unlimited potential, as we were sharing earlier. There are folks with unlimited potential in the community, and the immigrant community as a whole. There is so much potential, and what I realize is that yes, that threat of deportation is always there. It's always in the back of people's heads. It's certainly in the back of my head, but I cannot live like that. We cannot live with fear. And I'm sure the Muslim community understands it very well after 9/11, when people placed unwarranted guilt upon that community. You cannot live with a guilt that is not caused by you. And so likewise, immigrants just in general who are undocumented, we cannot live with the guilt of a system that is completely broken, not out of our creation, but out of the creation of white supremacy. And so I understand that from a socially conscious perspective. And so I live my day well. I live it with pride in knowing who I am. However, I do know that my community suffers and is oppressed. So I always aim to build with them a sense of, not a sense of false security, but a sense in identity, knowing why they are here, uh, a sense of them valuing the sacrifices that their parents have made, and realizing that yes, even if they are more privileged, like Brother Hassan said, or like I said, that we can actually continue a actual movement, not just rely on specific policies or programs to benefit us and then say the job here is done, but actually changing the policies, changing the system, and then changing the culture towards a better culture, a better society, that not that it tolerates us or welcomes us, but it actually treats us as human beings. And so that is in essence my day to day.
Well, that's it's something that you said, Luis. So, and Hassan, I'd like to answer this. So, a lot of times people think that this is a Latino issue, and or that's something that other communities are not affected with. Number one, first of all, there are Muslims who are Latino. So there's that, and then there's Muslims who are dreamers, who may not be Latino. So and I know you worked a lot in the community. Could you share a little bit from your experiences?
One of the things I started doing many years ago when I started practicing was to track the countries of origins for my clients and people who came in for consultations. And I'm at now 115 or 116 countries and counting. And the reason why I started doing that is because I wanted to understand and have a deeper appreciation for how similar the struggles of various immigrant communities are. And so from a vantage point of a lawyer who spent 17 years representing people from 115 countries, nothing is more clear to me, and I believe this with every fiber of my being, that all of our struggles are tied together. We are, in fact, in the same fight. The two communities that I serve largely are the Muslim community and the Latino community. And I don't mean to, again, they're not completely separate, but to the extent that they are seen or recognized as two separate communities. From my perspective as a lawyer, the suspicion, the hatred, the exclusionary policies that affected the Muslim community in the early days after 9/11, it's the same exact kind of exclusionary hatred driven by white supremacy that affects the Latinos every day. The policies look different. DACA looks different, right, from NCers. Mosque surveillance, masjid surveillance looks different from workplace raids, right? The CARP program, the controlled the policy that delays green cards and citizenship for Muslims looks different than the regulations on asylum, right? So they look like different things. And so the biggest mistake that the members of our community can make is to think that our struggles are ours alone. When you understand that they're actually coming from the same place, it's just that they've been engineered for maximum impact on a particular target community, then you start to see where that solidarity can be built. So, I believe this with every fiber of my being because I have spent time researching and digging into the papers, the intellectual and conceptual papers of the anti-immigrant movement. And I've seen how they've actually built this movement, how they've actually come up with these policies. Where do you think Trump gets it from? How is it that he always has a policy ready to unload on some immigrant community? Whether it's TPS designation, revocation of DACA, the Muslim ban, ramped up deportations, family separation, ripping kids, family detention at the border, the migrant protection protocols, which we call migrant persecution protocols, making people wait in Mexico for their asylum cases, and even stuff that has come down this week. The expansion and extension of the green card ban to non-immigrant visa holders that was issued. I mean, today is the first operative day of that. or the rules that are affecting the eligibility for employment for asylum seekers. Where does he get it from? These policies were locked, loaded, prepared, honed over the last 40 years.
And they're
and they're just putting them into practice now.
So let's talk about this recent ruling on DACA by the Supreme Court. What did it, number one, represent to each of you? And combined with the subsequent banning of several kinds of visas and a promise to reserve visas for only the most educated and skilled immigrants in the future, do you find the Supreme Court ruling a real win or a temporary BandAid on deeper roots of this issue?
Luis, do you want to?
It is certainly a temporary BandAid. It's a combination of both, actually. Sometimes it's not so binary as it's one thing or the other. It is if we have to take a look at the grand scheme of things, it does feel like a victory, because this means, again, that several folks will feel, okay, I don't have to worry about not being able to renew. And so that's a victory in itself if we look at that individual. Collectively, we do know that this is a BandAid, that the solution is not only to be renewing this program or even to have this program alive, but the actual solution, it goes even beyond immigration reform and having folks becoming citizens, but it's actually changing the society into one that it actually consciously understands the roots of the anti-immigrant movement, the roots of white supremacy, the roots of white supremacy within the current society. And so it is just a band-aid. It's a band-aid for now, but again, it is welcomed, especially in this day and age in which there is so much darkness coming from at the federal level. There is so much darkness, so much uncertainty, so much energy driven towards dismantling programs, enacting policies that affect the communities. So there is so much going against us that small things are glimmers of hope. And this is one glimmer of hope that we have. And folks, that's why they were celebrating it, even though it is, in the grand scheme of things, a band-aid for now.
Yeah, I would agree with that entirely, that sentiment entirely. It is a very welcome band-aid. As a lawyer, I can say
the band-aids, right?
Well, I'll take the band-aid right now. It was a shock. As a lawyer, I can say I was not expecting that decision. I was not. I had my predictions about the Muslim ban. I had my predictions about TPS and all these other, this one just really, it was a shock. It was a shock. And as an immigration lawyer who fills out forms and has to get paperwork right for people for a living, I am quite amused at the fact that the reason why DACA, the Supreme Court upheld upheld DACA and protected DACA is because the federal government did not get the paperwork right.
Oh gosh. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. First, tell me, why is it called the case itself is called Department of Homeland Security versus Regents of University of California. So tell us why it's called that.
So it was actually 3 different cases that were consolidated. When you have a program like DACA that gives so much empowerment to so many different people, then there is a web of what the Supreme Court called reliance interests, right? There are students, universities that are now banking on these new students coming in. There are jobs that are being filled, jobs that are being created. Let's not forget, a lot of dreamers start their own businesses and employ U.S. citizens and U.S. workers, right? And so you yank the plug on DACA, then not only their work permits disappear, but there's a lot of other reliance interests from U.S. businesses and families and communities that are going to be affected as well. So basically, the bottom line is, if an agency is going to do something like that, something that far-reaching for a policy that's been around for 8 years, it better have a really good reason for doing it. And if it's going to do something like that, it has to show its math, right? And it didn't. It failed miserably. The administration thought that they could simply issue an executive order and just revoke it, and not really have to explain why they did it. right? And it was heartening as a lawyer to see that that there was still our institutions left that said, no, if an agency wants to do something like that, it has to show its math. And ultimately, you know, that's all that the Supreme Court said, that the only thing illegal about DACA was the way you revoked it. So if you want to do it, you can still do it. You're the executive branch, but you didn't do it right this time, so you have to go back and try again.
So what is this loophole in the ruling? So what's next? Because I saw, and I'd like to discuss that. You did share some next steps and like a breakdown of it on your Facebook page.
Sure.
So I wanted you to perhaps like, you know, share that with our audience as well.
Sure. Well, look, this is a BandAid, and the administration absolutely will want to go through the channels and the roadmap for exactly how to revoke DACA was essentially laid out now by the highest court in the land. So there's nothing to suggest that they would not want to stop it. Now, I'm not a politico. I'm not going to predict whether or not it would make sense for them to do it, or whether they're going to do it this close to an election, or how much red meat do they want to feed to the base. We've all heard the theories. Reality is, I don't think anybody really knows what's going to happen. What I'm telling my client for us to do at this point is to, you know, presume that they're going to do it, get yourself whatever protection you can on a temporary basis, continue to push for the real reform that we need, and see if there's any bridges to permanent residence that may be available to as many dreamers as possible. So, you know, it doesn't change what we actually have to do on the ground. They tried to revoke it this time, and, you know, they failed. They might fail again. And I'm proud to be part of the team, standing with folks like Luis, to be part of the team that holds the administration's feet to the fire. If they're going to do it, it's not going to be easy, and we're not going to make it easy.
So, Luis, what does CASA has planned now that the decision has come down? What are your focus areas in the aftermath of the decision?
Our focus areas is to focus heavily with those now that it's back open, that it's back running. We want to ensure that the folks that do benefit from it have access to that they are able to do their initial applications or are able to continuously renew. And so that's what we're doing. We're serving 3 states here in the area, Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. And so we're getting the word out to the communities. Again, we're talking about a group of folks who are working day in and day night, and from morning to sundown. And so we want to ensure that this message is getting to the community that, hey, this is a BandAid, but like Hassan mentioned, there will be efforts to continue to dismantle this program. And so we want to ensure that folks are benefiting from the program. That is on the services side component. CASA, we do three main things. We do services, we do community organizing, and advocacy. Our advocacy will continue 100% as well. We will be holding the administration's feet to the fire, absolutely. Not only that, we will be making sure that those DACA who may benefit from DACA, but also just the community at large, the immigrant community and their allies, they are out there in front of the White House, that they are there in front of the Supreme Court and outside of Congress to eventually find a solution. Because as of now, it's been decades that this movement has been going on, and there has not been a single solution when it comes to the real fundamental problem of a broken immigration system.
So what should people be keeping their eyes on, Hassan, for the next, people who are either in the movement or perhaps even just lay people now as elections are coming up? There is this, and this is part of the work that you do as well. This is a term that I've never really seen before. Crimmigration. Yes.
Yeah.
So what is that, and how will that play into? And we see that we know that Islamophobia, like the Islamophobic attacks, start rising in an election year. Does that happen with immigration as well?
I think it does. I think if anything, it's hard to tell. If it's hard to tell, it's because there's been such a barrage of hate coming out of the White House empowering people who have those racist feelings, this racist underbelly of our society that feels empowered and emboldened to come out and say whatever they want and do whatever they want to people of color. The fact is, America, we don't look like that anymore. We are a diverse nation. We have people from all over the world that, if given the chance, can contribute and work to create something much greater than the sum of its parts. That's always been the highest ideal to me of being American. And the fact that there's a lot of people, including this person in the White House, who think that America should not be that, well, you've got a tough road to hoe, because we're not going to go out like that. So what are you going to look for? We need to absolutely keep the pressure up, especially during this time of deep introspection, when I feel like people are beginning to start asking themselves those tough questions of confronting our own history as a country, who we are as Americans, and what it is that makes us American. As people are in the shadows of the Black Lives Matter movement, this is a time when we can ask ourselves who we are and confront that racist past and say we want to be better than that. Mm. And the fact that white supremacists, look, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Why? Because the immigration quotas up until 1965 were race-based. And my parents were physicians, but they wouldn't have been white enough to come into the United States until the civil rights movement paved that way. Mm-hmm. So immigrants like myself, Pakistani immigrants, or children of Pakistani immigrants, we owe our existence, our lives, our privilege in this country to the civil rights movement. We need to understand that's where it comes from. We need to take guidance from the leaders in the civil rights movement, in the Black Lives Matter movement. We need to understand that it's because of that. That's the reason why we have the privilege that we have. So, we are truly in the same struggle. The flavor of white supremacy might change depending on the target community, but it's all coming out of the same box. Mm.
And that's another thing, that a lot of our community members do fall for that model minority myth, that only the super educated, we came here, we made it, so why can't everybody else? So there's a lot of that occurs. So, and especially since in the future, President Trump has pledged that the visas in the future will only go to the most skilled or the most educated. Do you have both of you have any comments on how this model minority myth could develop further in the future and possibly further harm other minorities in our country and cause those divisions?
I would say one thing. I think it's not only within the Muslim community. I think we see it just in general in the immigrant community. There is this racism. There is one. This nation is funded in capitalism. So I'm not gonna say pro or cons against that, but it's fundamentally also extremely racist. Mm-hmm. And so when you combine those two things, the perception is that if I am this class, this economic class of person in this country, then I will be okay. Mm-hmm. But people have realized that whether people of color, but specifically Black people, that even if they are they reach a certain socioeconomic status, they are not generally accepted as they think that they should be. And again, this is just one example of why that myth is actually not true. And so we come back to what Hassan said earlier, that this fight is my fight, and that we fundamentally are here because of the continuation of the civil rights movement. And I 100% agree. You mentioned the word immigration, the criminalization of immigrants. That is one thing that it's correct. All of these policies, all of these programs that look at the so-called legality of a human being, right, is based because they want to expel and they want to exclude us from the society. And they want to exclude you not because of your potential, not because of your academic level, right, or even the socioeconomic status, but because of who you are and where you come from. And so again, this creation and this myth of model minority needs to be dismantled as well. We have to fundamentally understand that the system is racist and capitalistic at its core. And for us to figure out a way forward, we have to understand again that it is a unified fight. It not only is on the immigration front, but it's also in the racism front. And it's a combination of that, and also when it comes to class, because a lot of the folks who are immigrants here in the U.S., we not all of us, of course, but a lot of us did come to the United States because of the search of a better future, and so we are in what is so-called a lower socioeconomic class. But that does not mean that we're any different from
Right.
anyone in the United States, and so we have to dismantle all of these barriers, all of the systems, all of these oppressive systems that have allowed the system to create the structures and this false legality, which says a white person that is walking in the street is any better. They are not 0.0001% better than I am. And again, that is what we have to dismantle.
Yeah, I can't really say it any better than Luis did, but I do want to say one other point. There is this idea that the more educated you are, or the better stock that you come from, or the higher socioeconomic status, that means you somehow have a greater right to immigrate to another country. And a lot of these same people that come and educate, they work and they pay a lot of taxes and they build businesses and they prosper, and alhamdulillah, that's great for them. They want their parents here too, their elderly parents, to come with them, right? Their parents aren't going to come here to work. Their parents aren't going to come here to pay into Social Security. But these same educated people recognize the value of family. Why? Because families intrinsically have merit. Hard work intrinsically has merit, whether you're fighting a court case, running a company, or picking strawberries. Hard work has merit. Grit has merit. Determination has merit. So this idea of merit-based immigration, which is trumpeted by this administration so often, that you have to be educated, you have to have this to be able to come here, you have to have that background or this, socioeconomic status, it's bunk. Yeah, it's meaningless. Because, as Luis said, everybody has something to contribute, even if it's the being together with your family. And that's the reason why a compassionate immigration system, one that's built on compassion and understanding the importance of things like family unity, understand that everything else, economic security, contribution, and whatnot, it flows from people feeling secure, people feeling happy, and being in a position to be able to contribute. So we have to dismantle, as Luis said, all of the oppressive structures that stop that from happening.
And this is so interesting because one of the things that I've been involved with here in Maryland is, especially with CASA, right after Trump's election, we had a fight over here to make sure that ICE wasn't, all these security lists weren't created, and all of that. So one of the things that we saw was Asian immigrants specifically. And that included South Asians, just that whole, and they came in and testified. Like, it was unbelievable the amount of testimony and how organized they were against any sort of not having ICE associated with the way the police is working, any of that. So where is this coming from? Like, where is that? I got here from, I don't cut the line sort of thing. And I came here. So where, this sort of why isn't the immigrant community itself, is it class? Look, I'd love to get your comments on that.
Yeah, of course. I think that will happen. I think not only with the Asian community. I know I saw that specifically that it did happen in Maryland, but it happens across the board. Human beings, we are tribalistic, and I think sometimes to a detriment. I think we don't understand that we are a human race. We don't understand that we're in this together. Look, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and even then, people are still in a pandemic that affects us. Specific demographics affect and impacts us more than ever. Right. Brown and black folks it's affecting us more because of socioeconomic factors and where people live and the conditions in which people live because of the again of the system and how it is set up and who it oppresses and who it considers essential and who it provides any opportunities. And again, it is this thought that the individual is better. It is this thought that because I graduated from high school or college or I came the quote unquote right way, that I am in fact superior than you. It is because of this thought that because we place differences between my nation and your nation, we see it within the Latinx community. We see it between nationalities, and that is something that we're also combating within just the whole immigration spectrum. But not only that, I mean, we within the communities of color, we also see anti-blackness, and so it is this division. But we have to understand one thing, I think, fundamentally. I remember posing a question to community members. I asked them, "What makes us the same?" And people said, "Oh, culture, food. A lot of us like spicy food. We got rhythm, and all of those things." But I said, and nobody mentioned this, and I mentioned, "What about oppression?" And so, even if we are oppressed and hated upon and excluded, then we are unified by an external force that goes beyond our culture. And so, if we are unified out of necessity, then we have to understand that. And so, I think a lot of not a general community, but pockets of the communities are failing their children or are failing themselves if they do not see that external force that is unifying us at the end of the day. And so we have to realize that we have to continuously work with our communities. One of the things and teachings from the civil rights movement, specifically from folks like Malcolm X and Ella Baker and Stokely Carmichael, is who later changed his name to Kwame Ture, is to have love for the people in your community. We have to love and have patience for the people in our community, so much patience that we work with them, because at the end of the day, they are facing that oppression, whether they believe it or not. They are facing that oppression, and they eventually have to get to where we're at. That's just they are part of the community, whether they want it or not. And that goes as we go up in the sense of community. We divide ourselves, but at the end of the day, we are definitely one group of folks who is being oppressed, and that we have to challenge the system, and we're seeing it right now more than ever.
So, what would you, looking at this past week, and what are the lessons that can be learned for activists and advocates for immigration rights? And what's, so I'd like to get some next to-dos, like action. So, what kind of solidarity do you want to see as an immigration rights activist? And you're advocating for people from everywhere, right? Because that's something that I want to ask you, Luis, and then I'll ask you, Hassan.
Yeah, there are two things. I think one thing within our communities is to get incredibly informed and share that wealth of knowledge with our communities, get them engaged. That's one thing. However, I will stop that right there. I will say that we can get engaged, but truly what needs to happen, I think, especially in the United States, it is the white community, not only on immigration rights and immigrant rights, but also in the racism that is happening, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, the Black community. It is if somebody is being racist against me, it is not my duty to fix the racism. Heck, I did not create that racism. I did not create this broken immigration system. I can only speak up against it and push it as back as possible and aim to solve it that way. But it is fundamentally, I think, a huge challenge and a huge epidemic beyond the coronavirus within the United States that needs to solve. And the white community needs to have that conversation. They need to create a conversation, a culture of educating themselves, not on progressive values, not on conservative values, but in humanistic values, in understanding that people, one, deserve to live with liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all of these values that they espouse that the country is founded, but actually live it. Again, let's remove the religious aspect. The United States, and specifically those folks who are white within the white community, because this nation is it was founded through many bad things, but they ultimately have been the people that have been empowered. I mean, we're in the midst of elections, and the majority of the candidates are white, even though there has been progress. Again, this community and this culture needs to do a lot of internal job. The black community has been so helpful by peacefully protesting, by saying, "Hey, treat us well, treat us correctly," and there has been progress. I'm not going to deny that, but I think it is time that the nation as a whole, that people as a whole, they go back to their homes, they have serious conversations, and they call each other out, and they improve themselves, because it is not my job to make somebody less racist towards me. It is not my job for them to fix the systems that they created to tolerate me, but it's my job to speak up and say, you have to do something about yourself, because I am not here to fix you, but please look at inside yourself and into your family, so that you are able to treat others better than you have treated me.
And Hassan,
Yeah.
yeah.
Agreed. I mean, this is not going to happen without white people stepping up and understanding their role in all of this. That's not to say that we don't have work to do as people of color. We certainly have anti-blackness, as Luis mentioned before. We have our own prejudices that we have to, reckon with and confront and vanquish. But white supremacy is something that is intrinsic, that was built one of the foundational, bases of this country. Slavery was legal until not too long ago, and it's persisted in many ways, shapes, and forms, since then. And a lot of those same tools that were used to allow slavery as an institution to persist have been repurposed and are now being used against the immigrant community. You can change the color from black to brown, but again, it's coming out of the same box. So at some point, we all need to ask ourselves, and I hope that point is now, because Lord knows it's been time, who do we want to be as a country? What kind of country do we actually want to build? Do we want to go back to the hierarchy of the past, or do we want to see what could happen and what country we could build if we actually did empower our communities, instead of spending time thinking about how best to detain them and deport them away from their families? So, it feels like a time of reckoning right now, with the worldwide, protests after the murder of George Floyd. Like I said, it's long overdue. It's been a long time coming. These are questions that we need to ask ourselves. Right?
I wanted to ask you, so Hassan, what are the sort of law, like as elections come up, like prosecutors and judges also have a huge part to play in all of this entire system. So what are some of the things, like tips from both of you that I'd like for you to give our audience to keep in mind as people are running for elections? I mean, we had some great news coming out of New York last night that Elliot Engel was beat by Jamal Brown. And we're hoping the same thing will happen in Kentucky, and we can get rid of Mitch McConnell. God, please. But so from you, from a legal perspective, and from you from an activist perspective, what a couple of things that you would want in the framework of the elections coming up?
To a certain extent, vote, speak, write, march, right? Those are the ingredients of social change. And if you don't do those things, lawyers like me, we won't have a record. We don't have anything that we can use to go to a court to ask for redress, to ask for something. If you don't, if it's like the old thing, the old story about the tree falling in the forest when no one's around doesn't make any noise. You can argue this left and right. You can argue this backwards and forwards. But the bottom line is, if you don't toot your own horn, if you don't play that, no music is going to get played. You have to make noise. You've got to speak up, and record, instances with the police. Go to the rallies. Go to if you are able to march in the streets, then march in the streets, do so safely. Write to your congressman and vote, and not just for the president every 4 years. Vote every chance you get. My God, you have an opportunity to vote for your for sheriffs, for your prosecutors, for your local and state representatives, local state senators, and for members of Congress. You can vote for judges. You know, find out these opportunities and use your voice, use your vote every chance you get. Every chance you get. And if you're not going to do it for yourself, then vote for somebody else in your community that doesn't have that vote, that doesn't have that voice. You know, I've worked for a long time as an immigration attorney, and you know, the end result of citizenship, you know, having somebody actually be able to cast their vote for the first time, it seems like such a simple act to those of us that were born here. And so many of us who just throw that opportunity away every single time it comes up, and you don't realize exactly how powerful, you know, it can be. Sometimes you got to understand that there's people that have died and would die for the right to vote, and they never get that chance. So keep that in mind for a lot of your friends and neighbors in your community. Voting, you should vote like your life depends on it, because for many of the members in your community, it actually does. So, you know, from a legal perspective, give us something to work with, and that means you've got to speak up. You can't sit back on the couch and yell at your TV or send nasty tweets to people. You've got to get up off the couch and got to make something happen. Use whatever privilege and resources you have to be able to make that noise and make those statements that will actually drive. That's the engine, that's the fuel that actually will drive that social change.
Well, we're out of time. I'd love to spend more time with you all, and perhaps we can have you back, and so we can, you know, continue this discussion, and especially since this is going to be in the news, or either one of you has action items that need to be. That's one point of this show, is that to get people off their couches and go do something. So anytime, Luis, please do reach out if you have other action items that you'd like to get out. We started this as a peace and justice channel because face it, if mainstream media is not gonna like say, oh yeah, like, you know, join Luis in the next action, that's just not gonna happen. So this is where you know, we have to make our own narratives and make our own platforms. So please do come and use the platform whenever there's a need. And thank you, all of you, for joining us today. We'll be back tomorrow with an episode on the new domicile laws in Kashmir and the actions of the Indian military, as well as the administration there, where they're opening up liquor stores in Kashmir Valley. So join us tomorrow for another great program. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.